Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to blackdoctor.org and your favorite Tuesday night Facebook Live here on blackdoctor.org. It is What to Know with Dr. Mo. And so we are here. We were here 2 weeks ago. If you missed last week, if you missed the show 2 weeks ago, you missed the treat. We had a wonderful, wonderful program. And we are back again here to really talk. Tonight is all about the seven deadlies. And what we mean by that is not the seven deadly sins. We're talking about the seven deadly diseases. And those are the diseases that impact Black Americans the most and cause our demise the most. And so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to give you some tips and ways to avoid if you don't have it and ways to improve your outcomes if you do have it. And so really, really looking forward to that. And again, of course, as you know, this show is all about your questions. So please make sure you put those in the comment section. So as you know, at the beginning of each show, we asked you to drop in the comments where you're watching from, put in your area code, your zip code, your high school, whatever you want to put in there. Drop that in the comment section. Also, tag your friends, share it, share the show. Let people know that Dr. Mo is here answering questions right now. You need to stop what you're doing and come to blackdoctor.org and get your medical question answered. And finally, these three things that we should ask your questions. How about that? Ask your questions. I had a brain freeze right there for a moment. Ask your questions. I'm going to shut up because obviously my mouth is not working tonight. Dr. Mo, how you doing?
I love it so much. I'm doing fantastic, or as I like to say, I'm magical. That's right, because it sets a certain level, a certain expectation that magic will occur wherever I am, and wherever I say it's magical, it's going down. And I think that that's really, really important as we talk about, like, this is my favorite time of day and my favorite thing to do, because we need to have people who we can trust to ask questions, to get good information. We do a lot. We think we do research, right? And our research consists of
Mm-hmm.
our Google search. Sometimes we might actually go to, a reputable website and look up some things. But, it's important for you to be able to have access to doctors who have good, solid information, who can
Absolutely.
break it down in ways that you can understand, and who can give you some feedback and some tips on how to incorporate this stuff into your lifestyle. Because a lot of times, even when I go to the doctor, they're up here and they're talking up here, but we need to bring it down here to where people are living and where people are eating and where they're working and where they're praying and what they're doing. So that's what we're here to do tonight. So I love it. Bring it on.
Absolutely. So we already have a question, so we can. And Tara, we're gonna get to your question when we get to the second deadly, because that we're going to be addressing that tonight because that is one of the seven deadly. So, but the first one we're going to talk about tonight is the number one killer of African Americans, of Americans in general, but definitely the disparity is greater for African Americans, and that is heart disease. And that's the big one. There's all types of heart disease, and that is the number one killer. And I just got some quick statistics here. African Americans aged 18 to 49 are two times more likely to die of heart disease than any other Americans. The Affordable Care Act kind of helped that because it gave access to health care to more people. However, the disparities still exist. And so we're here to talk about how to, the first seven of the seven deadlies we're going to talk about is heart disease. So, Dr. Mo, kind of help us people understand how can we avoid heart disease? If you have it, how can we help out? How can we kind of reverse some of the damage that we've done to our heart as we age?
Absolutely. So the first thing you got to understand, and I want you to put a thumbs up in the chat if you think you know what heart disease is, right? Thumbs up in the chat if you think you know what heart disease is. Because what heart disease is it really is an umbrella term for a lot of different heart conditions, cardiac conditions, right? There's four main types of heart disease. So there's a disease of the heart itself, right? Meaning like the valves. So I want you to think about the heart, and I like to break things down in terms people can understand. Think about the heart like a train station, if you will. Okay. Trains coming in, trains going out. And the trains coming in and out, that's the blood flow going in and out of the heart. And the heart is responsible for pumping that blood and sending it out, for receiving that blood and then moving it around to get it to the body. So it receives and then it sends out. If you have a problem with the pump itself, with the train station, with the heart, that's a form of heart disease. It could be either with the valves or the turnstiles that makes the blood go through, or it could be a problem in the muscle of the heart. Okay. It could be a problem with the rhythm of the heart. That's called an arrhythmia. Your trains aren't running at the right time frame. And so now you got traffic jams, you got accidents because the trains are all doing what they want to do, right? It's not coordinated anymore. And then you have the disease of the arteries themselves. The tracks are, are faulty. They're old. They need repair. So the tracks aren't functioning well. And guess what happens with the trains? They get blocked, they get stopped, they get clogged, they get slow. And so there's different types of heart disease. And, when we talk about what causes it, sometimes the causes of heart disease can be hereditary, they can run in families, but much of it has to do with our diet, with our lifestyle. And that's a thing that we want to hear because that means we can maybe fix it, but it's something we don't always like to hear because it means maybe it's something that we did that contributes to it. You know what I mean?
Well, I like it. I like the way you break it down into things that we can understand. Most of us can understand. And I would say this: think about it like this: if you had a luxury car, you had a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, and you continuously put cheap, regular gas in it, right? You don't get your oil changed on a regular basis. You're not getting your spark plug. You're not getting tune-ups. You're not getting all of the things that you need to do to maintain the performance of that vehicle. Guess what? It's going to go down. Your body is the same way. If you continue to put bad fuel in it, which is eating a lot of sweets, eating a lot of salts, eating a lot of high fatty foods, high in bad cholesterol. If we don't work out, we don't exercise and get that heart rate going, then we're not up, keeping up that vehicle. And guess what? The performance is not going to be as good. And the heart is the engine of that body of the vehicle. And once that goes, if it starts to go, it's,
I love that because if your engine goes, guess what? It's a done deal. It's like, transmission you can replace, but when once that engine goes, that's it. And
yes,
so our engine needs certain things to run, right? We need our blood flow to be consistent and to be smooth. And what makes our blood inconsistent, what makes it thick is fat. And so the fat that we eat goes into our stomachs and gets absorbed into our bloodstream through a pretty complicated process. But then we end up with all these little fat lobules, just like soap in your sink when you make dishes, or you put that pot that has grease in it, you put it into that soapy water and it forms those bubbles, right?
right,
That fat can get into our bloodstream and it can make our blood thicker or it can deposit in our blood vessels. And if it deposits into the blood vessels around the heart that supply the engine or the heart, then you end up with coronary artery disease. If it clogs the valves that let the blood go in and out, you can end up getting things like strokes because that clot can then travel somewhere else.
right.
It can make the heart sluggish. And when the heart is sluggish, it has to work harder. And when that heart works harder, it can cause thickness of the muscle. And thickness of the muscle in the heart's not a good thing. It's not like you pumping iron and all of a sudden you got, some biceps and you got some triceps. It's not that way for the heart. We don't want our heart muscle to
Explain to
be
me, explain to us, because help us understand why that is. Because when you think about the heart being a muscle, and you say any other muscle in your body, the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, the better performance it has for you, right? If your legs
Mhm.
are stronger, you can able to stand up longer, you can run farther, you can lift more weights. But explain to all of us why that heart getting thicker is not good.
Absolutely. You ever try to blow up a balloon, a nice thin balloon that, one of those long stretchy ones, and you blow it up and it's stretching, it's stretching, it's stretching. What happens when you try to blow up a ball? Because the ball, the rubber is thicker. You have a harder time blowing up that
Mhm.
ball, right? It's the
Right.
same thing for the heart. So when the heart muscle is normal, the heart can expand and get all that good blood flow that's coming back from the lungs that has oxygen to it and it expands and it fills and then it squeezes and pumps it out to the body.
Okay.
When the muscle's too thick, the muscle won't allow the heart to expand. It gets stiff, and then you're not getting enough blood flow in, and that means you're not getting enough blood flow out, and that means it's also backing up to where it came from, which is the lungs, and that's how we end up with things like congestive heart failure.
Mm. Okay, so that makes perfect sense, right? So, like, okay, and much like those guys that you see that really, really work out and they're so big and they look and they're kind of inflexible and they can't move. Your heart could be the same way. When it gets too thick, it gets
Oh,
all bulky and it can't expand as much. And so therefore, yeah, less blood pressure and then back up. And that can impact other organs because it's not getting the blood and the oxygen that those other organs need in order to function properly. So you can have all kind of problems.
and
All
that
right.
brings us right into the next thing, right? When we talk
Yes.
about what's the consequences of having that heart have to work harder, the consequences that you end up with high blood pressure. Well, what's the blood pressure? It's the rate that the heart pumps the blood. How much force does the heart have to exert to get all that blood everywhere? It's like those kids' toys, the space rocket where you have to step on the pump to get the rocket to go up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
How much force does it take? The more force it takes because of the heaviness of the rocket, or it's too much blood flow, or the blood's too thick, or it's backed up and the heart muscle's too tired to squeeze. All that stuff contributes to high blood pressure. And we had a question in the chat, right, about blood pressure and about medication. So we should talk about blood pressure.
Okay.
Anybody
So
know what's the
yes.
number one symptom of high blood pressure? Number one symptom. Put it in the chat if you know it.
Mm, that's a good question. So I want to see if people can answer that question. So let's answer Tara's question and then come back and see. So for those that are watching, chat room, what's the number one symptom for high blood pressure? So see if you can answer that question and we'll get that answer to you. But let's answer Tara's question while we're waiting for people to put their responses in the chat room. How to get off pressure medication?
All right. Well, so the answer is it is what we call multifactorial. It takes a lot of different ways to get off of blood pressure medicine. But the number one way you can get off your high blood pressure medicine is through exercise and through diet, through changing your diet.
Mm,
Yep. And then, so by changing your diet, what do we mean by that? Somebody put in the chat salt, right? So we can lower our salt intake because of where the salt is, the water follows. Too much salt in the bloodstream means more water, means more volume. And guess what happens when our bodies have too much volume? Where does it end up? In our legs, in our ankles, right? We get these swollen feet and legs and ankles. We get swollen fingers at the end of the day. Everything, our joints are all swollen because we have too much volume, too much water in our blood. So we can lower our salt to lower our blood pressure. So there's dietary things that we can do. We can increase uh, um, our vitamins, and we can increase our niacin, like B6 and
mhm.
B2. That will help to decrease our blood pressure. We can exercise. Exercise will help to decrease our blood pressure naturally. And those are the ways that you can begin to wean off your blood pressure medicine. But the first way to get off of it is to get on it. And so making sure that if you have high blood pressure, that you're addressing that, because the consequence of high blood pressure is it can lead to things like strokes. It can lead to death, to blindness, to really sudden scary symptoms. And so you may not know that you have high blood pressure. And I think we got some answers in the chat.
Yes, we do. So the question that we asked right before we addressed Tara's question was, what is the number one symptom of high blood pressure? And we've got everything from none to body swelling to no symptoms, a lot of no symptoms, headache. Somebody put salt. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Doc, what is the number one symptom of high blood pressure?
Number one symptom of high blood pressure is no symptom at all. You guys got it. Your
Mm,
your viewers, our viewers, are really savvy. They're smart.
yes.
And so, how do you know you got it if you have no symptoms? What do you do?
Yeah, that means you got to test regularly.
That's right. Get it checked out, especially if it runs in your family, especially if you're overweight, especially if your diet is, not quite where you want it to be. And let's be honest, most of our diets aren't exactly where we want it to be. But when you go to your doctor, you should check. If you have a blood pressure cuff at home, you can get a blood pressure monitor and you can check your blood pressure at home, because by the time you start having symptoms, then you're further along than you want to be.
Doc, there's a couple of things that I've heard, and so I want you to kind of demystify this for me and for our audience. Is that Black Americans or Black people in general on that diaspora have a genetic tendency to absorb and retain salt. And so our salt intake has to be lower than the general population as a result because of that fact. Is that true?
Oh boy, I love this question. And the answer is that yes, there is a component. When you trace the incidence and the rates of high blood pressure and the reasons why black people in America have high blood pressure, it can be traced back to stress on the body. It can be traced back to the very middle passage, the experience by which we got here. And that experience turned on certain genes that made us more susceptible. And when you couple that with the foods that we were given to eat, right? Here's where the diet comes in, because the food that they gave us was the scraps. It was the heavily salted stuff that was rotting and that was not doing well. The meats that we were given to eat, the foods that we had were so high in salt to try to preserve them so they wouldn't be completely rotten. That contributed to our high blood pressure issue. So when you make those black eyed peas or those butter beans with ham hocks and smoked meats and all that stuff,
You're
right?
making me hungry.
I see, and this is part of our heritage, but
Right,
when you know better, you do better. And so
right.
we have to discover new ways of eating and adapting our diet that don't rely on that much salt. But yes, there is a genetic and a potentially hereditary component to high blood pressure that makes us more susceptible. It makes certain medications work a little bit better for us than other medications because, it's not just the heart that's involved with this, it has to do with the kidneys as well. The heart
Mm.
pumps the blood. The kidneys gets rid of excess fluid through the urine, right? It regulates the volume in our bodies. And so when our blood pressure is high, our kidneys kick in to try to get rid of the fluid, and that mechanism can go wrong too as a result of high blood pressure.
And today and this month, March, is Kidney Health Awareness
That's
Month. And
right.
so we just, if you missed it earlier today at 12, we played our first program of Kidney Talks. And we had some wonderful, the Ron and Joanne Paul uh, Kidney Center and George Washington Hospital in DC. And those doctors did a fabulous program. So I suggest you go back and watch it. But they're going to be on every 2 weeks here, starting going forward. And so the first show was just phenomenal about kidney disease. And so I encourage everybody to go watch that. So we've got a couple questions that are very, very similar. Jacqueline and Annie are both asking the same thing. What is a normal blood pressure? What should your blood pressure be, and what shouldn't it be? What should we looking for?
Ooh, I love this question. So, normal blood pressure. There's two numbers that we look at when we talk about blood pressure. It's the something over something, the systolic over the diastolic, right? And so we want that number normally to be less than 120. Okay. So less than 120, 110 to 120 is a great number. If your blood pressure, your systolic's like 100, that's okay. And the diastolic number, that top number, you want it to be less than 80. So 120 over 80 is a pretty good blood pressure for people who don't have high blood pressure. If you have a diagnosis of high blood pressure, that number may be a little bit low for you. And the recommendations are that if you already have high blood pressure, your blood pressure could be 130 or so, and that might be okay. Okay. So it used to be 140 over 90, and they said 140 was good. 140 is too high. So 120 is a good number to aim for.
Right. So and just and I learned this. So I'm always like trying to show whatever I learn a little piece of information, so the systolic is that's the top number I believe. And
Hmm.
that's when your heart is contracting. That's the number of when your heart is contracting. The diastolic is the bottom number, and that is when your heart is between beats. Right. So
It's
that's what
resting.
those numbers represent. And so beat, non-beat, beat, non-beat, and so therefore that's where we're talking about. So when those numbers start to rise, that's when you start having problems.
Yep.
Um, so there's a question from Kirkland. He says he has a pulse of 47.
Hmm.
Are there any concerns? Does he have any concerns?
All right. So the pulse is the heart rate. How many beats per minute? A pulse of 47 sounds like he might be a runner, maybe, or he might be somebody that is who exercises quite a bit. So the condition of having your heart that's beating too slow is called bradycardia. Bradycardia means your heart's too slow, less than 60 beats per minute. is considered bradycardia. So if your resting heart rate is 47, that's a little bit too slow. And like I said, unless you're like a marathon runner or something like that, then those people tend to have a slower, lower resting heart rate. But otherwise, 47 is a little bit on the low side. You want it to be closer to like 60. And what makes the heartbeat slow? Well, slow heartbeat can be related to different problems like arrhythmias or electrical impulses in the heart that are misfiring. So it's
Mhm.
missing beats. It's not getting the signal. It's like you got a short circuit, or like the batteries in your remote control aren't quite, the energy is not up. So sometimes you push the button and it changes the channel, sometimes it doesn't.
And that's all. And using our car example, that's like when you turn on that car, and sometimes that when that battery is low, it's not working, and it doesn't turn over. So we
Mm-hmm.
don't want that to happen either. So we got to make sure. So
Exactly.
Kirkland, go get that checked. What check can he do to see if he has an arrhythmia or something like that?
So the best check to do to see if you're having arrhythmia, number one, is to get a doctor or somebody to feel the pulse, right? And you can feel the pulse on your radial artery right here on your wrist. You take two fingers and you can feel it beating. And you can time that. If you don't want to sit for a whole minute, 60 seconds, time it for 15 seconds, count the beats for 15 seconds and multiply it times four. So that's the way to determine your pulse or your heart rate. But then you want to get something like an EKG, which is where they put electrical leads on your body to look at how the signal is transmitting to tell the heart when to pump and how often.
Right.
So an EKG can tell you if you have things like heart blocks, because when the heart is missing the impulse or it's not getting the signal, you can get a cardiac block or an arrhythmia, and that can result in a slower heart rate. And those are people who might need things like a pacemaker. So this is something to take seriously, because if you have a low, slow heart rate and you don't get it checked out, you could pass out, you could faint, right? Your heart could
Mm,
stop beating, you could have strokes and other things. So you really want to be careful to make sure you check on that heart rate.
all right. All right. So, if you're just joining us, we are talking. This is What to Know with Dr. Mo here on blackdoctor.org. And today we're talking about the seven deadly diseases that are impacting Black Americans. So, we talked about heart disease, and then we moved right into high blood pressure. So, we're going to move on so we can get all of these. We're going to move into the next one, which is dear and dear to your heart, there, Dr. Mo, and that is the big C, the word we have to whisper when we talk about it, cancer.
Oh boy. So here we
So,
go.
how do we avoid this? How do we? There's a lot of ways that we could avoid, but let's talk about the ones that impact Black Americans at a high rate. We're talking about breast
Absolutely.
cancer, which is definitely, and for those who don't know, Dr. Gary is a breast cancer surgeon. She was a surgeon today, but she loves coming here and giving us some information. So we thank her for that. Um, and prostate cancer is another big one for Black Americans, and those uh, particularly prostate cancer is one of the more treatable cancers that's out there. And so, but we've got to get checks, and we've got to make sure we're doing what we need to do. Colorectal cancer, we all know that became very, very famous with Chadwick Boseman. So colon cancer, multiple myeloma, which is it's a rare cancer, but it's a cancer of the bone marrow, and that impacts your immune system, and that is a very, very difficult cancer uh, to treat. We've talked about that here on blackdoctor.org as well, and lung cancer, which is something we don't talk about too much, particularly around smoking. We know that's a big component, but there are other components that lead to lung cancer, particularly for African Americans because of policies like redlining. We tend to live in areas where there's a lot of air pollutants
Hmm.
and that we're ingesting a lot of times. And so that leads to a lot of lung cancers as well. So I'm going to shut up because I'm not the expert here. I'm just setting it up for the expert. So hopefully you're knocking out the park. But let's
You
talk about cancer.
You're doing great. You're doing fantastic. But what people need to understand about cancer, just like heart disease, right? Cancer is not a disease, it's not a single disease. So, just like heart disease is an umbrella term for a lot of different conditions, cancer is the umbrella term for uncontrolled cell growth. The cells keep growing and growing and growing, whether it's in the heart, in the prostate, in the breast, in the lungs, in the colon, in the pancreas, wherever it is. These cells have figured out how not to die when they reach a certain age, and they live forever and they keep reproducing. So, cancer is a disease of uncontrolled cell growth. And the things that prevent chronic and preventable illnesses, all the stuff we're talking about here, are the things that can help prevent cancers. But what we know is that it's not just about diet and nutrition, it's about hormonal imbalance, right?
Hmm.
Because we know that hormones can contribute to cancers, especially things like breast cancer and prostate cancer. We know that inflammation can contribute to cancer. Look at what happens in our lungs when we smoke, right? In our
Right.
colons, the foods that we eat can contribute to inflammation in the colon that can contribute to cells being damaged. And if that damaged cell makes more damaged cells, makes two, makes four, makes a million, now you have a tumor, now you have a cancer. And so there are, African Americans have not only the highest rate of some of these cancers, but almost for every cancer, stage by stage, we have the highest mortality, even when our rates are lower or the same as our non Black counterparts. So, what am I saying? I'm saying that when America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia,
Yep.
right? We learned that. We saw that during COVID. And so when you look at the guidelines for things like breast cancer, the recommendation is that we should start screening at age 40 or 10 years younger than the youngest person in your family. So if your sister had breast cancer 36, everybody in the family need to start screening at 26. But that
Mm.
means we got to talk about that family history, otherwise we don't know. The guidelines for colon cancer screening, right? How do we screen for colon cancer? It's a colonoscopy. Might
Yeah.
not be fun, but I know a lot of Black folks who are doing all kinds of detoxes and, drinking teas and, doing all the cayenne pepper and the honey and the lemon and it's good for your throat. It's soothing, right? But if you're going to do a detox, you might as well go ahead and let them put the camera up there and take a look at it because colon cancer is taking Black folks out of this world.
Yes.
Young Black people, young folks. And so the recommendation now for Black folks, African Americans, they used to say everybody start at 50, get your colonoscopy. For us, it's 45.
Right.
And so your doctor should be telling you these guidelines, right? Prostate cancer. How do we check for prostate cancer? Well, the PSA and the prostate exam. But if you don't get that prostate exam, you may not know that your prostate is enlarged, and having an enlarged prostate doesn't mean you have cancer, but it means your prostate has some inflammation and you can have a risk factor for cancer. Lung cancer is still number two. When we look at what's killing us from cancers, breast cancer is number one, lung cancer is number two because of smoking and environmental factors. Even when we don't smoke, there's still factors that contribute to us getting lung cancer. And so we got to make sure that we protect those lungs. Make sure, and like you said, redlining, asthma, the places that we have lived and the conditions under
Right.
which we have lived contributes to the state of unwellness that contributes to cancer. So
Right.
yeah, cancer's a big one for us.
I just want to add a little bit to the prostate situation, and maybe just because I have a family history of it, so I'm very,
Hmm.
very akin to it. So PSA stands for prostate specific antigen. That's the name of the test
Yep.
that you get, and so your number should be below 4 when you're getting that PSA test. And so if your number is above 4, you might want to think about getting a biopsy. Now, there is a step in between there that you can request before you go all the way to a biopsy, and then you can have an MRI done of the prostate. And so, for Black men in particular, when we hear biopsy and all that biopsy entails, we tend to leave the doctor's office and not go back, and that can let that cancer fester, and then it gets to stage 4, and it becomes harder to treat because it's spread to other areas, and now you've got a bigger problem, and that's what leads to the death rates. And so, between that, if your doctor says you have an elevated PSA, request to have an MRI done of your prostate before you have the. If you're kind of squeamish about getting a biopsy done, request to have an MRI. Let them see the whole image of the prostate and see if there's some areas of concern. So that's just a little tidbit that we learned from Dr. Mac Roach, who is a prostate cancer surgeon in California, and he is one of the best in the country. And he kind of gave us that little tidbit. Uh, so I'm spreading that information, paying it forward with that information for because, and you pay that forward to you because I know there's a lot of women watching us here today, watching it. Share with your brothers, your cousins, your friends. Let them know, hey man, go get go get your PSA test. If it's elevated, ask for an MRI before if you're uncomfortable with the biopsy.
Yep. Absolutely. I agree. And I put in the chat that beginning at age 40, men should start Screening for prostate cancer. Black men should start screening for prostate cancer because this is something that is treatable, beatable, preventable,
Yes,
right? And but if we don't look, we don't find. And so you got to be your own advocate because the guidelines for when to start screening is getting really hairy and a lot of doctors aren't sure when to start. And so they may say, "Oh, you wait till 50." Not if you're a black man. If you're a black
right.
man, you don't wait. If you're a black woman, you don't wait, right? Black women have on average, let's say breast density, at the thickness of our breast, 31% greater breast density. So the thicker your breast is, the harder it is to see the cancers. So you should be getting maybe ultrasounds or other screening in addition to mammograms or at least a 3D mammogram. And put in the chat, if you don't know what a 3D mammogram is, I want you to put a question mark in the chat right now because we'll talk about it if you don't know what a 3D mammogram is. But these guidelines are different for African Americans, and that's something that you got to know because you may go see a doctor who's not African American, they're not black, and they don't know and they'll treat you with the same guideline as other people. So you got to be your own best advocate.
Absolutely. I believe the statistic is 1 in 6 men will develop prostate cancer, and so uh, that puts you in rare company, right? So
Yep.
get it checked, get it checked every year. If you have a family history, I would suggest backing that up 5 years from 40 to 35, because
Hmm.
and
That's
start
right.
getting that PSA checked, and it's covered by insurance, and it's one of those regular screenings that should be done at all times. All right. So we got three of the. Oh, there's a question mark. Maggie wants to know what is breast density.
All
Or
right.
no, the 3D mammogram.
So 3D mammograms is a type of mammogram. So let me just start by saying a mammogram is an X-ray, right? It is using X-rays or radiation to go through the breast to look at the thickness of the breast, and things that are thicker, like tumors, show up whiter on the screen. How do we relate that? Well, if you're old like me and your grandmother had a console TV, remember console TVs? We had those big floor
Flow
model
model.
TVs. Yes, indeed. It was furniture. And the amount of static on the screen is the amount of density that you have. The more static you got, the harder it is to see. Is it Sally Jesse Raphael? Is it, Phil Donahue, People's Court? What is the show on TV? Murder She Wrote? Who knows? And so the whiter it is, the harder it is to see. 3D mammograms have now given us a technology where we can look forwards and backwards through the breast. So the machine will compress the breast and it'll move. While you're standing there, that machine moves across, and that enables us to now generate a movie. So I can see forwards and backwards what's going on in that breast. And if there's something that looks like it's in there on one view, go a little deeper. And I can see, is it still there? Go a little deeper. Is it still there? If it's not there anymore, then we know it's just your breast density. But if it's really real, it'll be like slicing into a loaf of bread, like an olive or something in a loaf of bread. You're going to see it in more than one slice. So
Mm.
3D mammograms is the best technology right now for extremely dense breast. MRI is another one that we use. It's magnetic waves. It's not approved for everybody, but it's another tool that we can use. But at a minimum, Black women should be getting 3D mammograms, and that will help us to see through the thickness of the breast.
I'm going to address real quick what Rich has asked before we move on to the next section. He says, "Deep, should my doctor have mentioned this to me? Should I find someone new?"
Oh,
I don't know. That's a interesting. It's a difficult question to say yes or no to.
yeah.
Rich, I would say ask your doctor, and if he downplays it, you might want to get a second opinion. But if but it's not something that's common knowledge. And a lot of times, doctors, when you have an elevated PSA, they'll refer you to a urologist, and urologists will basically uh, they're more apt to ask to order a biopsy than they will an MRI. So I don't know if to put that all squarely on the doctor to suggest an MRI, but if you're uncomfortable with the biopsy, ask them, if you could get an MRI as an option before you get the biopsy. So just have a conversation with your doctor. I don't know about finding
Yeah.
someone new just right away.
Let me jump in and say this. It's a trust relationship, and the way that I might broach this is I might ask my doctor, hey doc, listen, I'm trying to get ahead of prevention and stay on top of things. Are there guidelines that you're aware of that are different or unique to me based on my risk factors? Can we have a conversation about my risk? Right? And that doctor should be like, okay, well, your risk is this because you're a Black woman, because your family history, because you're overweight, because you're whatever, not taking it personally, But that doctor should be able to tell you what some of your risk factors are, and then when you should be screening or how much screening based on those risk factors. And if race doesn't come into play at any point in that conversation, it's a little bit of a red flag. And then you
Yeah.
could say something like, well, how important is race in this? Are you aware of screening guidelines that are different? Like, should I be screened differently, doc? And if they're like, I don't know, then yeah, find a new doctor. But if they're like, you know what, here, let's pull up the guidelines and let's look together, that's a good doctor, because they're going to show you as they, where they get their information. They're going to show you where they get their information and look at it with you. So I would challenge my doctor to partner with me and say, can we go over some guidelines for some things? I watch this program, and, I'm trying to be on the up and up here. And I know Rich is my homie. He's trying to do a lot of health and wellness in the community right now. And it's a great conversation to have, and get you some Black docs too, who can have these conversations with Black men and talk about it so you guys can advocate for yourselves.
All right, so Rich, I hope that answers your question. And as we move on, if you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Mo. We're talking about the 7 deadly diseases that are impacting Black Americans. So we are going through, we've done heart disease, we've done cancer, we've done high blood pressure, and now we're going to move on to the one that we all know the most, and that's the sugar. And that
Uh-oh.
is known as diabetes. And so diabetes, 88 million people in this country are pre-diabetic, and that is when your blood sugar is between 100 and 125. And so that you won't know that you're pre-diabetic, okay? But diabetes is another illness, another disease that disproportionately impacts Black Americans and leads to a disproportionate number of amputations um, in Black Americans as well. And so there's a lot of kind of impact that diabetes is kind of leads to other diseases, including chronic kidney disease. As kidney disease pops
Mm-hmm.
back up, it can lead to can it lead to fatty liver disease? Stop me if I'm wrong. So, and fatty liver disease, and you don't want your liver going bad. I'm trying to tell you that liver is a special organ in your body, so you might want to keep
Yes, it
that healthy.
is. Yes, it
You might want
is.
to keep that healthy. So I'm going to shut up and let the doctor tell you how we should be treating diabetes if we're diabetic, and how should we be keeping our blood sugar down if we are not diabetic.
I tell you one thing, this show it's like a game show, right? You're challenging everything that I know and everything that I have studied. And I kind of love it because it's not the things that patients ask me about every day, but diabetes, right? Or the sugar, or sometimes a touch of sugar, or the sugar beaties, or I don't know, that all kinds of names that I grew up with hearing about for diabetes. My grandmother had it, my father had it, that comes into play as we talk about this, right? But
Right.
what exactly is it? Diabetes is when there's too much sugar in your blood. So, what controls how much sugar is in your blood? Well, there's an organ that does that. It's called the pancreas. The pancreas is the organ that makes hormones. So, hormones are the worker bees in the body. Just like estrogen is a
Mhm.
hormone that makes things grow, it makes you have your menstrual cycle, makes your uterine lining thick. Testosterone, right, gives us libido, right? It
Yeah.
causes things to happen for men, facial hair, things like that. Insulin is the hormone that breaks down the sugars and helps us to store them. So it says, up, I'll take that. That's energy. I'm going to put that away for a rainy day. Let's put that money in the bank,
Hmm.
right? So insulin is the banker. If you don't have enough insulin, or if your body's not responding to insulin, right? And your insulin's not, we call it insulin resistance. You got insulin, but the body's not putting the storing the money in the bank, not storing the sugar. That can result in diabetes, and you have too much sugar in your blood. We measure that one through finger sticks, right? You can measure it from a finger stick, but that gives you just the that moment how much sugar's in your blood. The way you measure over time is called a hemoglobin A1C. And
Yep.
this is a measure of about 3 months or so of how your blood sugars have been doing. And that gives us a better idea of whether or not you're pre diabetic or diabetic, uncontrolled diabetes. Because the thing is, having too much sugar in your bloodstream is bad for a lot of different organs. It can cause heart disease, strokes, kidney disease, eye problems, dental disease, nerve damage, foot problems. I mean, too much sugar is just like your kids go crazy when they get too much sugar, your body goes crazy.
Hmm.
Too much sugar. And so it's really important that we regulate this because, somebody start putting in the chat, what are some of the signs and symptoms of diabetes? How do you know if you're diabetic? Okay, so we're
Mhm.
gonna definitely talk about that. But what's important for you to know is that your hemoglobin A1C really should be lower than, I'm gonna say, 5.6 or so, 5.7. Anything higher than that, you're getting into that pre-diabetes stage where you need to change your diet. You need to do some things differently, and there are different types of diabetes. There's type 1,
Mhm.
okay, where the pancreas just shuts down and doesn't make enough. There's type 2, where type 2 is as a result of fatigue of the pancreas. And so your body becomes resistant. And then there's gestational diabetes that can happen during pregnancy as well. So, three different types of diabetes and the treatment for them: diet, exercise, weight loss, decreasing those blood sugars. Sometimes we treat with oral medications that can make our bodies more sensitive to the insulin that we're making. It can help it to work a little bit better.
Mhm.
Or sometimes we need to just take replacement insulin because our kidney just wore out. We're not making it anymore.
Yeah. And there's some foods. There's a number of foods, and we're going to talk about that, at another time on another show. But there are some foods that can help you lower your blood sugar. There's a one that I found to be curious, but I love the fact because I love it is cinnamon. Is
Hmm.
So, and that's something that I know as Black folks we like cinnamon as a people, and so if you're a coffee drinker, you can put a teaspoon in your coffee. Um, Cinnamon on if you do still eat meat, I sprinkle a little bit on my steaks,
Mm,
and it adds a nice kind of earthy flavor to it. And so I find creative ways to get cinnamon into my diet even though I don't have diabetes, I'm trying to keep that blood sugar, try to regulate it as much as possible. But there are a number of foods that you can eat, a number of things that you can eat to help. And there's a number of diets that you can. It's a Mediterranean diet is good for blood pressure, I believe, as well as
hmm.
it's also good for the DASH diet is also one that's been prescribed a lot of times for blood pressure. Um,
Yep.
there was
And,
another.
well, you really want to take in foods that are that have a higher glycemic index, right? That takes
Mhm.
more energy to break down than regular carbohydrates like white potatoes and white rice, right? And so the glycemic index is something that you want to be aware of. So if you're having potatoes, you want to have some baked sweet potatoes. You're having rice, you would have some whole grain brown rice, some quinoa. You really want to increase your fiber intake, right? So,
Mhm.
fiber is not just for pooping, moving our bowels. Fiber helps us to reduce our risk for heart disease, our risk for cancer, our risk for diabetes. A Mediterranean diet, as you mentioned before, Mediterranean diet is great because you'll get in some of those omega fatty acids
Yep.
from the fish, right? Things like salmon and mackerel. They're a really good source of omega fatty acids, and that helps to decrease inflammation. And diabetes is a disease of inflammation of the pancreas. So the more you can decrease your inflammation, the better you will be, the healthier you will be, and the more you'll decrease your risk for diabetes.
Absolutely, absolutely, love it, love it. Love it. So we're moving along here because we got to get to our next of the seven deadlies, stroke, and this falls under that headline of a vascular disease. And so it's still connected to the heart because we know that the heart is the pump. But let's talk about stroke. And I think a lot of people first let's define what a stroke is, and then kind of help people, then give some people some tips on how to avoid having one.
Okay. So a stroke is a blockage, right? It's a blockage in the brain. Okay. So a stroke is a blockage in the brain. And there's a lot of different things that can cause a blockage. And what I mean, I don't mean just like a blockage of your thoughts, like you forgot your words. I mean that there's a blockage in the blood vessels and the blood supply and the oxygen to the brain. So something has happened, and all of a sudden, that brain's either not getting enough oxygen or not getting enough blood flow, and the part of the brain that's blocked off is the part that starts to demonstrate symptoms. So some people will have a stroke and they may lose vision in one eye. Some people have a stroke and they may have slurred words. Maybe their face begins to droop, or they may have symptoms down their arm, numbness, tingling, other sorts of neurologic things going on that can be a result of that stroke. So wherever the blockage is, whatever the part of the brain is that's starting to die, is the part that will develop symptoms. And there are different types of strokes. So When we talk about so and so had a stroke, there's different types. You can have something that's from a blood clot that happens right in your brain. Okay. So, inflammation in your brain or a clot inside of an artery that's bringing in the blood flow. If that artery gets inflamed, gets clogged up, right, from smoking, from atherosclerosis, from lots of different things, that vessel closes off, we got a problem. That's called a thrombotic stroke. You can have an embolic stroke, right? Or embolic stroke is when the clot comes from somewhere else. Your heart valves, okay, they're not functioning properly. And all of a sudden, the blood gets thicker on the valve and then it shoots up into the brain.
Mm,
That's an ischemic stroke, meaning not enough blood supply. You could have a hemorrhagic stroke, meaning a blood vessel ruptures and now you have bleeding into your brain. And that bleeding is causing the pressure on the brain, and you're starting to lose one, blood supply to the area, but two, you're starting to compress that brain, and you can see some really bad side effects as a result of that. And I see somebody in the chats talking about their family member who had a stroke, and the thing is, when we have these strokes, if we catch them soon enough,
hmm
many times they can be reversible. And that brings us to the last type of a stroke. The last type is called a transient ischemic attack. It's like it sort of kind of happened. It was a stroke, a mini stroke, a warning stroke,
hmm
but then you recovered from it. You recovered within 24, 48 hours, not like you had to go to rehab and recover for 2 weeks or 3 months or 6 months. That's a little bit different. And
Right.
so it's important to know the symptoms and the warning signs of stroke.
Yeah, my sister-in-law is a speech pathologist, and a great percentage of her patients are stroke survivors. And
Hmm.
so they had that stroke, and now they have to relearn how to talk because they've had some sort of impact on their mouth, their ability to form words, and so she has to teach them how to talk again. And that's not all that rehab. Uh, you know, I've seen people lose the ability to use the whole left side of their body,
Hmm.
face all the way down, and so it just depends on, as Doctor saying, it just depends on how long, as quickly as they catch it, the better your opportunities are. Much like a heart attack,
That's
the
true.
faster and that's one of the things that we learn from here on Black Doctor is that if you've had a heart, if you feel like you're having a heart attack, some baby aspirin can help in the moment, and then get to the hospital, right? Get to the hospital as quickly as you can. But some baby aspirin can really help in that process, and help lessen the impact of that heart attack. So stroke
Hmm.
it, is no joke. That rhyme was not intended, but
Yep. Stroke is no joke. Just
stroke
like
is no
crack is whack. You got it. And time is of the essence, because if you are having these symptoms, and you go ahead and put them in the chat, because people need to know, it's not just, oh, you passed out and you're having a stroke. The symptoms of a stroke can be slurred speech. It can be numbness. It can be tingling in the hands and feet. It can be all of a sudden you're talking and next thing you know, your mouth starts drooping.
hmm
It can be trouble finding your words. Like your brain knows what you want to say, but your mouth can't quite say the words.
right.
And it's not always as a result of blockages in the brain. Sometimes you don't have enough blood flow. And this is something that Black folks need to be really, really careful about, is anemia, right? Lots of Black folks walking
Mhm.
around eating ice saying, oh, you know what, I'm anemic. I'm crunching this ice because it's helping my anemia. But anemia is not a good condition to be in. It means your hemoglobin or your red blood cells, you don't have enough of them. Okay, your blood is low, your volume of blood. So what's the heart supposed to do if you don't have enough blood to squeeze out? Where's it going to go? The heart squeezing, it goes up and it comes back down. You don't have enough to get there.
So how does
And
somebody treat just on how to say you treat anemia? I know you can't just drink blood. So should you be
mhm.
eating more iron rich foods to help your body?
Oh, yes. So I love this one. So there are foods that we can eat for anemia. Leafy greens, dark leafy. The dark leafy greens, the darker the better, the bitter the better. So kale, spinach, they're great sources of iron, right? So iron-rich foods. Meat, yes, for people who are meat eaters, there are certain foods that are more rich in iron than others, like liver, like beef. Seafood can be rich in iron. Beans can be rich in iron. There are foods that are fortified in iron. Like you get your Cheerios, it says it's fortified with iron. Our nuts, our seeds. So, yes, iron rich food, beets. Beets is a really great source of iron.
Mm,
Black strap molasses. You can put that in your coffee, in your tea. You can put that in your baked beans. You can put it in whatever it is. A tablespoon of blackstrap molasses a day will help to increase your hemoglobin and your iron levels. So, yes, there's some foods that you can eat that can help fight anemia naturally.
Mm, mm, mm.
Hmm.
So Leah put in my hemoglobin is 7.6. Does that have any meaning to you, Doc?
7.6 is low,
Okay.
and it may be where you normally are. And even if that's where your baseline is, that doesn't quite make it okay. Your normal hemoglobin really should be closer to 10, 11. It should be at least 10. I mean, normal hemoglobin is probably closer to 14. But I think 10 is kind of the number that you want to aim for. So if your hemoglobin is 7, and what contributes to low hemoglobin and anemia? Well, guess what? Fibroids. Uterine fibroids is probably one of the
Mm,
number one causes of anemia in Black women because we have these heavy menstrual cycles because of these fibroids, right? And so it's a problem for Black women. So anemia makes you feel tired and sluggish. It makes you pale. It makes your body not function properly. And you got to get that checked out and see if you can consider some of these natural ways to get that hemoglobin up.
does anemia cause a lack of energy?
Absolutely does. It does. It makes you feel fatigued because what does the blood do? The blood carries nutrients and it carries oxygen, right? We need oxygen to get to our tissues, to get to our brain, to get to our heart, to get everywhere. So the less iron and the less hemoglobin you have, the less oxygen molecules. Our wound healing is poor because we're not bringing the oxygen to the places we need to go, right? So, and it makes you feel tired and sluggish, slowed down, weighted down, exhausted. Absolutely right. And one of the things people say when they get a blood transfusion, and I know people have some philosophical issues about blood transfusions, but when you get a unit or two of blood, you feel like a new person. You're like, wow, I didn't know I could feel this good. That's the number one thing people say. I didn't know how tired I was until I got some blood.
Mm, mm. So
Yeah.
yeah, so get those iron-rich foods in your blackstrap molasses.
Hmm.
Get that in there. So I think greens count. I think greens count. You could get some greens.
Yep.
That's as rich in iron. So just don't put them in all the bacon fat and all that other stuff, salt, and
It's
greases.
true. And we got people went out and got these air fryers. Put that thing to use, right? So I have a recipe I give to my patients for crispy kale chips. So you get you
Mm,
some nice fresh kale, chop it up really good. You can put a little bit of cracked salt and pepper on it. You can put it in your air fryer or put it on your baking sheet like parchment paper. Put it in the oven on 400 and you bake it. If you really want to get fancy, you can get a little chickpea flour and you can make a little paste and then they're extra crunchy, right? But you
mm,
start roasting your vegetables and it makes them a lot tastier. It makes them crispy. It changes the flavor of your vegetables without losing the nutrients because
right.
what we do is we put them in a pot of boiling water with some meat and some onions and some spices. And next thing you know, we got vegetable stew and vegetable soup. And I'm not saying that pot liquor isn't good for us, right? In terms of giving us some nutrients, but we cook all the nutrients out of it.
Yep. Yep. Wilton. So I'd love to talk about this more, but we're running out of time, and we got two more
All right,
diseases to
we
get
can get
to.
there. Let's do it.
Like, we're gonna finish it. We're gonna get. So, all right, so next one is peripheral artery disease, or PAD.
Okay. So, peripheral artery disease, PAD, so there's a bigger heading called peripheral vascular disease. So, if
Mm,
you look down at your wrist, you'll see the blue ones that are the veins, right? If you feel the pulse, those are the arteries. Stuff coming out, stuff coming back in. The arteries carry blood to the extremities, to everywhere. It's the transit system out. The inpatient, the inflow side are the veins carrying that fluid back to the heart, right? And so peripheral artery disease is when the arteries, they're pumping the blood out, those arteries are tiny, they're clogged, they're damaged, they're inflamed. Okay. And that is all a result of the things we've been talking about inflammation, whether it's inflammation in the heart, whether it's inflammation in those vessels themselves, then that can really cause some challenges because if the blood's not getting where it needs to go, then you're going to have poor wound healing. You're going to have gangrene. You're going to have pain, ulcers, things that don't heal. And there's some signs and symptoms of peripheral artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, right? So
right.
changes in the skin. Your skin is now shiny and you lost the hair on your legs, right? Like what's going on? You used to have hairy legs and all of a sudden your legs are all shiny and you didn't shave. Be concerned, right? Pain, weak pulses in your legs, in your feet, wounds that don't heal are signs that you could either have peripheral artery or peripheral venous disease, right? From the veins.
And two illnesses that can lead to PAD is high blood pressure, diabetes. So
Bango,
these
bango.
that's how we're all connected. High cholesterol can also lead to
Hmm.
PAD because cholesterol can clot and cause blockage in those blood vessels if it's in certain areas. And when you have PAD and you have those blockages, it can lead to numbness, and then that can also lead to amputation, right? Because you get to the
Hmm.
point where you don't have any feeling. A lot of diabetics have this. It's called diabetic neuropathy. I believe
Yep. Yep.
that's the term. And so you have lack of feeling in your extremities, and then those extremities go numb, and then the doctor says, "Oh, we got to cut that off. You got to lose a limb."
It's
And
true. Impotence. We got to talk about it because the fellas that's watching, right? Everybody want to be able to function and be
mm-hmm,
able to be optimal. Peripheral vascular disease leads to impotence, loss of libido. It can lead to, like you said, depending on whether it's inflow or outflow, DVTs, clots, right? In the veins that can go to the heart and go to other places and cause stroke. So it's all from inflammation. Absolutely.
that's a bad word, inflammation. So
Hmm.
a quick thing though, if you've got a relative or somebody that's diabetic and their doctor's recommending they get an amputation, ask them about a stent. If that limb could be saved by implanting a stent, and so a lot of black people don't realize that they can save those limbs by having stents placed in and getting that blood flow back going into those limbs, and so we can eliminate unnecessary amputations in our community
Yeah.
in particular.
You know, Ellis, I watched my grandmother go through diabetic neuropathy, where
Mm-hmm.
she began to have irreversible numbness, tingling, and pain in her extremities because the little teeniest, tiniest blood vessels, the capillaries that carry the blood to the nerves at the tips of our places, those nerves begin to die because the vessels are all shriveled up and tiny. For people who like plants, the roots are bad, right? If the roots
Mm-hmm.
are bad, that plant's going to shrivel, it's going to die. And when it does die, it causes significant pain, burning, tingling. Those nerves get damaged from diabetes. The nerves themselves get directly damaged. And it can, I mean, my grandmother used to say it felt like her feet were on fire
Yeah.
and she used to cry. It was a really just a sad and uncomfortable thing to watch. And so, diabetes is something that we really need to be aware of because it impacts our blood vessels. It's not just about having too much sugar and having to take a little insulin, just take a couple units. In fact, it impacts the
Yeah.
vessels in your eyes, the
Mm-hmm.
kidneys, the
Mm-hmm.
pancreas, every single organ. Wherever blood goes, then the tiniest little vessels is what gets impacted by diabetes and heart disease and smoking.
Yeah. So got to get that taken care of. And so finally, I know we're coming right up on the time, but the
Right.
last of the seven deadlies is I got to put it up. Where's my banner? There we go. Sickle cell disease, and we all have heard about this. And so this is just saying it's not specifically, but it's impacting black people at a greater extent. So white people can get sickle cell disease. I know I know it's like, but it's very rare that whites, but it's more common in African Americans, and it's really exactly what it says, where the the blood cells become sticky and they become deformed in shape. It's not that round shape that we typically see. They become shaped like a C or a sickle. That's why they got the term sickle cell. And then they can clump into areas of the body, causing pain, discomfort, loss of damage to organs because blood is not flowing properly. And so, when Doc mentioned about getting blood, transfusion of blood, sickle cell patients are the group of people that get a lot of number of transfusions throughout the year. And they need to get blood from black people.
Yes.
So this is my one pitch for if you are not a blood donor and you are comfortable doing that, please go donate blood because black sickle cell patients need blood from black people. And so,
Absolutely.
so please go donate blood for sickle cell. So Doc, take it away for sickle cell.
All right. So how many of you have ever seen The Grim Reaper? Right? You ever watched the movie Scream with the guy with the mask and he's holding guess what it's called? It's called a sickle. He's holding that thing, right? Because what happens is normal healthy red blood cells are nice and plump and round because they carry oxygen molecules, four of them. It's like a backpack. And so the sickle cells, they're not able to carry as much oxygen. And what happens is because of the shape of them, they don't glide right through the blood vessels. They get caught and they get stuck in places. And that can lead to clots in little vessels. We call that microvascular disease, where the blood cells are clotting in the kidneys and the digits, the fingers, the toes, the nose, the genitalia, the heart, the brain, right? And so
Hmm.
it results in people having really significant pain, anemia, the cells get destroyed. And this is a genetic condition. So when you have two of these faulty genes, you inherit one from mom, one from dad, you will have sickle cell disease. Now, there are people who have the sickle cell trait. You might have heard of that. I got the trait. That means you got one sickle cell gene and one normal gene. And you need to be careful who you marry, because if you marry somebody who has a sickle cell trait, two sickle cell traits can make a sickle cell child. And then it gets passed on that way. But this is something that significantly impacts Black folks. I have seen us go into the emergency department in what we call sickle cell crisis. Significant pain, feels like knives, somebody said, knives cutting you in your body. And people think that you are drug seeking, right? That you just want your Dilaudid. And so we have to really, number one, name it. When we have it, you put it on your forms, your intake forms, you put a bracelet on, you let people know, I have sickle cell. And
Hmm.
that's the reason why I may have these crises and I may have pain. Two, you've got to change your diet. Three,
Yes.
you got to, right, you got to make sure that you diet, you exercise, make sure that you keep up with the things that will prevent you from developing these sickle cell crises. And nobody can predict them, unfortunately. It can be very unpredictable. But by having a low inflammation diet, an anti inflammatory diet can certainly help.
Hmm.
Making sure that you hydrate very well, drink your water, that you keep up with your high in iron foods, right, to prevent
Hmm.
that anemia from getting worse, are all things people can do to reduce sickle cell crises.
Absolutely, those pain crises, and Doc is absolutely right. We have done a number of programs with sickle cell patients, and they all share the same story. So, people, if you have sickle cell, you should have a person that is going to be your designated buddy that takes you to the hospital if you're having a pain crisis, and to have a book, have a binder with all of your history, your medication history, your medical history, to hand that to the emergency room doctor. So when he says, "Hey, I need this particular painkiller," they're not thinking that you're drug seeking. They say, okay, this is an actual sickle cell event. Have your doctor number there available so they can, if they need to call and intervene on your behalf, to say, no, this person is not drug seeking. This is a child. So these are all of the things, especially as Black people, as Black patients, because A, we know there's a bias that says Black people can endure more pain than other groups of people for whatever reason that came about. That myth is still out there. And then, of course, the assumptions about drug use and things of that nature about Black people. And so the health disparities is really, really high when it comes to this particular group of people, because they have a significant need for, for blood. They have a higher rate of organ transplants because their organs get damaged by the sickle cell, and they have higher rates of this being mistreated
It's
by the
true.
healthcare system because they go into the emergency room more often than the rest of us do. And so we've got to do what we can. Hopefully there'll be a cure. There's a lot of people working on that.
Yes,
A
there
lot of
have been
foundations.
some gene therapy for
Some
sickle
genes.
cell.
Yes, yes, and it can be treated by, like, I think there's a bone marrow. I think there's a, you can do a
Mm-hmm.
bone marrow replacement.
Yeah,
So there are some
plasmapheresis.
really some treatments and therapies that have shown to have some promise with regards to sickle cell. Um, but again, it's a very, very challenging disease. So yeah, so Dr. Molodrop is a good. Jeff Krause give you a shout out. So
You know, I wish that we could talk more about the basis for this, the historic basis for this racism in medicine, because it's something that we definitely need to do a show on and really get into why this is. Because the reasons why people think we don't have as much pain, our blood is maybe thicker, our
mhm,
skin is thicker, all these things have a basis in how we
yeah,
got here in this country and how we were treated by the medical establishment, which contributes to medical mistrust. So it is very founded, and it's really real, and it's really sad and unfortunate. But the best thing you can do is be informed and be your own best advocate. Bring a family member with you who can articulate things, especially now that we're getting out of COVID, you know. But
yeah,
keep records, keep track of, you know, no, doc, my last A1C was this, or, you know, I might be anemic, but I've never been this. Like, you got to know your body and know your medical history and not shy away from those things. And if there's one thing you get out of this conversation, I hope that it's that. Is that you are the master of you and your body, and nobody knows you better than you. And you can't expect your doctor to know you better than you. When the doctor says, "Why are you here?" You can't say, "I don't know, you tell me why I'm here." No, you got to know. You got to be the owner of your own good health. So That's my plug.
Articulate it, be able to put some time frame on it. How long have you been having this pain? Well, it started then, and then give them a good number in terms of what's your pain level. Don't downplay it. Tell them the good number. Hey, this is what my pain level is. Um, this is when this indigestion started. This is what, the more information you can provide your healthcare provider, the better treatment you will get, because they say, hey, he's in tune. They know what's going on, instead of saying, I don't know, dog. It just started hurting. It won't
Mhm.
go away.
Yeah,
That's not enough
for a
information.
little while. Yeah. How long has it been going on? Oh, a little while. How bad is it? You know, a little bit.
It's so important. But man, this show goes by so fast. I look
It
up and it
does.
was like,
It
so
does.
we hope that this has blessed you all today. We have been really excited about doing this, and thank you, Paul, for hanging with us here. We talked about the seven deadlies. So we're going to ask you one more thing. If you got some good information on this, like and share it. Share it on your page. Let people know. Share it with your family members. Let them know. We're going to re-air this tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to re-air this program on blackdoctor.org. So if somebody missed it, say, hey, you need to watch it. Tell them to go to blackdoctor.org 12 o'clock tomorrow, 12 p.m. tomorrow, to watch this program again. Or you can share it on your page and say, hey, look, there's some great information that you need to help your lives get better. But I want to say one last thing. Remember the one thread that ran through most, if not all, of these things. Exercise and diet can help lower the. If you don't have these diseases, it can lower your opportunities to get it. If you do have one of these diseases, diet and exercise can help your outcomes in terms of improving your outcomes. So please focus on eating better and exercising whenever you can.
And you know, Ellis, that is the cancer connection. As we talk about what's the connection to all of this in cancer, the connection is inflammation. It's the fact that when our bodies are inflamed, when they're upset, when our balance is off, it creates spaces in the body for illness to happen. And chronic illness is a repeat insult. It's like cutting yourself in the same place over and over again and expecting it to heal properly. And it doesn't happen that way. The cells heal abnormally, and that's how cancers can develop. So, the common thread for all of this is you need to look at your lifestyle, decrease your inflammation where you can, eat good food that gives you the nutrients to make sure your blood is flowing the way it should and that oxygen is getting everywhere it needs to get and that your hormones are balanced, because all of those things contribute to cancer. So that's our cancer connection for tonight.
Thank you all for joining us. This has been a wonderful, wonderful program again. Dr. Mo, what do you know with Dr. Mo? What to know from Dr. Mo? And in 2 weeks, we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about kidneys.
That's
So we're
right.
going to have a special guest coming on, and we're going to be talking about kidneys, and we're going to have another special guest on at the end of that program. But I'm going to tease that for another time. We're going to talk about that another time for you. So you got to just see us in 2 weeks right here on blackdoctor.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Peace.